Beneath the scorched highlands of South America, where even the wind whispers in Quechua and ancient bones turn to dust in silence, there lies something wrong. Not haunted, forgotten, buried beneath centuries of soil, myth, and fear. In the mountains beyond Cusco, explorers stumbled upon a sealed cavern entrance in 1962. What they found inside would defy logic, terrify governments, and unravel the very history of an entire continent. Tunnels carved by unknown hands. Chambers lined with melted stone. Strange symbols etched into ceilings too high for ancient men to reach. And in the deepest sanctum, statues of serpent-headed kings who ruled from the shadows, with no mention in Incan memory nor Spanish record. But the most disturbing part? It wasn't the scale of the architecture. It wasn't the bizarre relics. It was the evidence of human sacrifice and a missing archaeological team who vanished without a trace in 1970. This isn't just a mystery. It's a war against memory. A secret older than empire. A labyrinth of lies and worship, waiting to swallow you whole. Now let's descend into the world no one claimed. Welcome to the Lost Labyrinths of the Serpent Kings. It began with silence. Not the natural stillness of windless heights or the hush of early morning fog, but a heavy, unnatural silence. A kind of quiet that presses against the eardrums, like something is waiting to breathe again. In July of 1962, a team of Peruvian miners working near the Vilcabamba region, a rugged, forested range west of Cusco, stumbled upon what they thought was just another rocky overhang. The soil had collapsed after a minor tremor, revealing a partial stone arch. It didn't match the surrounding geology. It looked made, carved, too precise. One man, thinking he'd found an Incan storage room, or maybe even a burial chamber, called it in to local authorities. The government sent archaeologists from Lima. Within days, a perimeter was sealed off. Something about the site unnerved the officials. The door they uncovered wasn't made of wood or simple stone. It was forged of basalt, perfectly rectangular and fused shut by some process that looked more like melting than masonry. There were no hinges, no seams, no inscriptions, just a mouth sealed tight. And yet behind it, something called. They brought out drills, hammers, thermite torches. Everything failed. It wasn't until a local shaman was brought in, skeptically, out of desperation, that progress was made. He performed an old Quechua rite, invoking Pachamama and the spirits of the mountain. 3 hours later, without warning, the door cracked down the middle and opened itself. No one spoke, not out of reverence, but fear. Beyond it was a long, sloping tunnel. Smooth, featureless, dry. It went down, and down, and down, far deeper than any Incan burial site or Spanish mine ever documented. The team descended. 15 minutes in, their lights began to flicker. At 40 minutes, their radio contact died. An hour later, they re-emerged, ashen-faced, sweating despite the cold, and unable to describe what they'd seen. They asked to seal the tunnel again. But by then, it was too late. The doorway refused to close. The Peruvian Ministry of Culture ordered an official excavation. But rather than celebrate the find, the operation was quietly buried under military jurisdiction. No press, no announcements, only rumors of a massive underground city, of statues with serpentine features, of sounds echoing in the deep when no one was down there. The locals refused to go near it. They called it La Boca del Dios que repta, the mouth of the crawling god. The international community didn't hear about the site until 2 years later, when a French spelunker named Benoit Lemoyne leaked grainy photos of the tunnel entrance. He claimed to have snuck into the excavation under the guise of a journalist. His words were strange, panicked, almost delusional. It was not made by humans, not even by gods. It was older. The walls sang. Something watches from the stone. Something hungry. Lemoyne disappeared shortly after his report. He was never found, but his footage survived. And so did the map he left behind, sketched by hand, but showing chambers that stretched for miles beneath the Andes. All of them shaped like coils. And at the center, a symbol. Not Incan, not Mayan. It resembled a serpent swallowing its own tail. It would take another decade before anyone attempted to follow that map. But once they did, the mountain would open again. And this time, it would not let go. It was 1939, Berlin. As Nazi Germany expanded its grip on Europe, Another war was being waged in the shadows, not with tanks or guns, but with relics and ruins. Hitler's obsession with the occult, with ancient power and mythic origins, wasn't just ideological, it was institutional. Within the SS, a secret division known as the Ahnenerbe scoured the globe for traces of lost civilizations and Aryan ancestry. They sent agents to Tibet, North Africa, even the Amazon. But one name never made it into the archives, because he never returned. Dr. Heinrich Ebel, a linguistic archaeologist, fluent in Latin, Sumerian, and Quechua. He was brilliant, deeply eccentric, and completely ignored by mainstream scholars until the Reich gave him unlimited resources. His mission: traced the myth of Viracocha, the white, bearded god of the Andes, whom some believed predated Inca rule. But Ebel's interests went darker. He believed Viracocha was a stand-in, a memory of an older pantheon. One erased, not forgotten. A pantheon of serpent gods. Ebel's last known coordinates placed him deep within the Vilcabamba Range, the same region where, decades later, the miners would discover that unnatural tunnel. Then, silence. He never sent another report. The Ahnenerbe struck his name from all official records. He was erased. But in 1966, a Chilean historian named Jorge Marin uncovered a private collector's archive in Santiago, a collection smuggled out of post-war Europe. Inside, a sealed wooden crate labeled Dr. H.E., it contained 4 items: a notebook filled with obsidian ink sketches of underground chambers, a partial translation of glyphs with no known linguistic origin, a photograph, grainy and creased, showing a figure standing before a colossal serpent-shaped arch, and most disturbing, a bone-handled dagger, inscribed with a spiral symbol and teeth carved into the blade. The notebook included a hand-drawn map, rudimentary, but with clear landmarks. A river bend, a mountain ridge, a tunnel mouth. The same tunnel mouth rediscovered in 1962. When word of the map leaked, a small, privately funded expedition was launched in 1969. It was led by an Argentinian-born German scholar named Dr. Karl Brenner, a reclusive researcher who had spent his entire career chasing myths of subterranean cities. He believed Ebel had found the entrance to a pre-human structure and paid for the expedition himself. He brought a team of 12 geologists, linguists, ex-military guides. They followed Ebel's map. They found the tunnel. They descended. For 5 weeks, there was no contact. Then, on May 4, 1970, a Peruvian radio operator received a garbled, static-choked signal from inside the mountains. Not stone, it moves, don't follow, blood in the walls, it knows our names, the message cut off. The team was declared lost. Later that year, a rescue mission recovered 2 audio reels and a single journal, water-damaged, burned at the edges, found near a collapsed section of the tunnel system. The contents would never be made public. But rumors leaked, of a chamber that defied geometry, of whispers in a language no one knew, but everyone somehow understood, of something massive moving in the deep, just beyond the torchlight. Dr. Brenner's journal included this final line: "We are not in a ruin. We are in something that waits. This is not a place, it is a mind." Then, nothing. The military closed off the area, declared it a geological hazard zone. Maps were altered. Access was denied. But copies of the original map, Ebel's forbidden drawing, circulated in whispers. Among fringe researchers, conspiracy theorists, cultists, and one of them would be crazy enough to go back. The man who went back was not a scholar, nor a soldier. He was a myth chaser, an obsessed American rogue archaeologist named Levi Halberd. In 1975, Halberd was already infamous in fringe circles. He'd been expelled from Colombia for forging a manuscript allegedly penned by a lost civilization in the Patagonian ice fields. He claimed to have found pyramids in Antarctica. He ranted about pre-human architects and a civilization that existed before the moon had an orbit. But he wasn't stupid. And he wasn't wrong, at least not entirely. Halberd had acquired a 3rd-generation copy of Ebel's map and matched it with 17th-century Jesuit travel records. He noticed a pattern in the writings of early missionaries. Repeated mentions of serpent churches, subterranean temples where the natives claimed the old ones still whispered through the rocks. Locations were vague, but one description stood out: a mouth in the mountain, a tongue of stone. Below it, walls that hiss and sing. Halberd set out with a team of 4. 3 would never return, but the footage would. The camera work was shaky, unsteady, handheld, but the footage was real. They reached the tunnel, entered it, descended. The first few minutes were unremarkable, claustrophobic walls, sloping pathways. But then, the tunnel opened. What the footage showed was impossible. Vast underground halls. Ceilings vaulted 50 feet high. Walls etched with thousands, tens of thousands, of intricate symbols. But these weren't Incan, not Mayan, not even similar to known South American glyph systems. They bore resemblance to Nagaric symbols, ancient Proto-Sanskrit, and the spiraling cuneiform of Sumer. Some even mirrored carvings found in Göbekli Tepe, Turkey, dated over 11,000 years old. How could those markings be in Peru? Even stranger was the depth. Halberd's altimeter confirmed they had descended over 2,000 feet underground, far deeper than any pre-Columbian tunnel system had ever been recorded. The temperature remained a constant 53 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was breathable, but heavy. It felt charged, as if electrically alive. The deeper they went, the more erratic the footage became. Whispers started appearing on the audio. Faint at first, a murmur, then a chant. The words made no linguistic sense, but still triggered fear. Panic. One team member began screaming uncontrollably. Another tried to climb the wall with his bare hands, tearing his nails off in the process. The footage cuts several times. When it returns, Halberd is alone. He continues downward. At the 9th tier, he finds what he calls the Chamber of Echoes. The walls here are made of smooth, black stone, not carved, but formed. Some theorized it was volcanic glass, but no lava tube had ever been this large or geometrically perfect. The chamber was circular, with a raised dais at the center, and carved into the dais, a map. But not of Peru or Earth. It was a star chart, and Halberd recognized it. He compared it, on camera, to Babylonian star charts, then to NASA projections. It matched a solar alignment from over 17,000 years ago. But the real horror came when the light from his torch swept across the walls. There were images. Tall, slender figures, humanoid, but not human. Coiled tails, slitted eyes, mouths open in song or screams. And surrounding them, humans, bound, kneeling, cut open, hearts raised in offering. The camera trembles. Halberd begins hyperventilating. He turns to run, but the audio picks up something. Not a noise, not a growl, a word. A word that no living language speaks, but that thousands have heard in dreams, Zalqueneth. He stops filming. 3 weeks later, Halberd staggered out of the jungle alone, emaciated, sunburned, barefoot. His journal was missing. His team was gone. And the only thing he repeated again and again was this. They were here before flesh, before light. They carved the stone. We were their cattle. We still are. He died 6 months later in a psychiatric facility, eyes scratched blind. But the footage survived. It was smuggled, copied, bootlegged. Scholars dismissed it as an elaborate hoax. But not everyone did. A linguist named Dr. Marion Kessler took particular interest. She analyzed the glyphs and made a startling discovery. Embedded in the repeating spirals was a sequence of prime numbers. Prime numbers don't occur naturally in language systems. They're used in mathematics and communication. Who, or what, was trying to talk? More importantly, what would happen when someone finally understood the message? The footage had circulated for years in underground circles. Bootlegs passed hand to hand, grainy VHS tapes with cryptic labels like The Spiral Path or Don't Follow the Map. But it wasn't until 1984 that a physicist, Dr. Ernesto Ferro, noticed something everyone else had missed. It wasn't the statues. It wasn't the glyphs. It was the walls. In a single frame, during Halberd's descent into the 9th tier, Ferro identified what appeared to be melted stone. Not eroded, not weathered. Melted, smooth, dripping, folded into shapes that could not occur without exposure to temperatures over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet the surrounding stone showed no signs of fire damage. There were no scorch marks, no blackening, and the air remained cool. This defied every principle of geology. Stone, once cooled and hardened, doesn't just melt in precise formations without advanced thermal technology, far beyond anything known to pre-Columbian civilizations. Ferro called it selective vitrification. a process theorized in high-energy laser experiments, but never achieved in the field. Except here, in the deep, serpent-lined corridors of the Peruvian underground. He wasn't the first to notice. Spanish chronicles from the 1500s had long puzzled over Incan structures with perfectly fused stones. No mortar, no gaps, no tool marks, as if the rocks had flowed into each other. At Sacsayhuaman, at Ollantaytambo, at Machu Picchu, sites miles apart, yet bound by a mystery of technique. Many believed it was a lost method of softening stone. But what if it wasn't just stonework? What if it was technology? In 1986, Pharaoh convinced a team from a private Swiss foundation to fund a covert expedition. They brought ground-penetrating radar, thermal scanners, and a prototype tool that could read electromagnetic anomalies in solid surfaces. They were prepared for hoaxes. They weren't prepared for what they found. Less than 2 kilometers from the sealed tunnel, buried under 70 feet of rubble and jungle growth, they discovered a collapsed chamber, artificial in shape. When excavated, it revealed a wall fused into a liquid swirl, like hot wax cooled in motion. Embedded in the wall were fragments of quartz and obsidian, arranged in fractal spirals, almost like a data matrix. But what data? What language? Pharaoh believed the wall wasn't decorative, it was an interface. And when scanned with EM pulses, it responded. Weakly, erratically, but it responded. The team recorded faint vibrations. Clicks. A rhythmic pulse. And then, for 6 minutes, it lit up. Not brightly, just a dim, red glow that pulsed from the base of the wall upward. The room grew warm. The quartz fragments hummed. The entire chamber resonated with a low, unearthly frequency that caused 2 researchers to faint and 1 to vomit. And just as suddenly, it stopped. The team wanted to dig deeper, to explore the chamber's adjacent passageways. But the military intervened. A Peruvian helicopter landed within 24 hours. The site was sealed. The data confiscated. The Swiss Foundation quietly dismantled. Pharaoh went public, briefly. He wrote an article for a fringe archaeology journal titled Thermal Anomalies in Ancient Andes Structures. The journal went out of print within the year. His house was broken into. His lab ransacked. His equipment vanished. By 1989, Pharaoh was living in a cabin in Patagonia, writing a manuscript he refused to show anyone. He called it Songs of the Melted Stone. In it, he proposed a staggering theory, that beneath the Andes exists a machine, not in the modern sense, not gears or engines, but a living, resonant architecture designed to manipulate stone at a molecular level. A biotechno-temple powered not by electricity, but consciousness, the human mind, fear, ritual, sacrifice. Pharaoh disappeared in 1991. His cabin was found empty, the manuscript half-burned in the fireplace. On the remaining pages was a single drawing of a serpent coiled around a spiral altar, fangs biting into the earth. And a final scrawled sentence: the stone remembers. The blood reactivates. We are waking it up. The implications were horrifying. If the underground city was more than architecture, if it was alive, then the disappearances weren't accidents. They were part of its design. And somewhere deeper, deeper still, beyond the melted walls and coiled corridors, something ancient was beginning to stir. It was called the Chamber of Coiled Kings. The footage from Halberd's Lost Expedition captured only a glimpse before cutting out. A vast subterranean dome lined with towering statues, each nearly 20 feet high. They were humanoid, but grotesquely elongated. Muscles bulged unnaturally. The arms hung down to the knees. The eyes were bulbous and lidless, and the heads, every single one, were crowned with serpents. The stone was not granite, not limestone. It was darker, denser, something unidentified, smooth as glass but cold to the touch. Some believed it was obsidian, others said volcanic basalt fused with metallic or possibly magnetized. But no tests could confirm its origin. Every sample taken from the statues eventually degraded into fine black dust, as if the material rejected separation. This room was the epicenter, the heart of the labyrinth. And no one who entered it ever came back the same. Those who studied it called it the Black Temple. The locals called it something else. Inti Lurca, the devourer of the sun. According to suppressed Quechua oral traditions, there was once a pantheon older than the Inca gods. A race of beings that came from below, not above. They taught language, metallurgy, and sacrifice. But they demanded something in return: worship, blood, silence. When the Inca rose to power, they sealed the Black Temple, not to protect it, but to imprison it. But the temple was never empty. Accounts from the 1997 Delgado expedition, an unauthorized foray led by rogue Mexican archaeologist Manuel Delgado, mentioned strange phenomena inside the temple. Infrasound that triggered nausea, hallucinations, and terror carvings that seemed to change position between visits, unexplained shadows that moved against the light, disembodied breathing that grew louder the longer they stayed. Delgado's team described one particular chamber within the temple, a spiral staircase descending into what appeared to be an altar pit. In the center stood a massive obsidian basin, bone-dry, but stained red-black. Around it, carvings showed humans being flayed, decapitated, disemboweled. But their deaths were not depicted with cruelty. They were shown as offerings, as keys. Delgado believed the Black Temple functioned as a machine, one activated by ritual. Not metaphorical rituals, literal, bloody ones. The carvings repeated a symbol found throughout the labyrinth: a serpent devouring its own tail, with a human heart inside its center. When Delgado's team camped overnight inside the temple, they set motion-triggered cameras around the chamber. Every camera glitched between 3 o'clock and 3:08 a.m. 8 minutes of total blackout. When the footage resumed, nothing had moved. But every team member awoke with bleeding noses and the exact same dream: a throne of bone, a crown of fangs, a voice, not in words, but feeling: give, and I shall open. Delgado left the Black Temple the next morning. He never published his findings. Instead, he joined a remote spiritual sect in the mountains of Chile. He claimed he'd seen the guardians, statues that were not statues, sentinels who watch and wait and remember every drop of blood ever spilled in their halls. He claimed they whispered to him. He claimed they wanted more flesh, more devotion. Delgado would eventually die during a self-performed ritual near the Bolivian border. His body found at the base of a pre-Incan ruin, heart missing, eyes burned out. The altar bore a single inscription, scorched into stone: the king's coil below. The flesh has returned. The gates shall open. The footage, the stories, the symbols, they all pointed to one conclusion: this was not just a place of worship. It was a cathedral to something older than gods. And the serpents who ruled it never left. They were just waiting, watching, guarding. And soon, someone would give them what they wanted. The first bones were discovered in 2002. A rogue dig, quietly funded by a billionaire collector with a taste for the forbidden, had begun near the northern mouth of the Vilcabamba tunnel system. The crew was international. No permits, no paper trail, and no intention of sharing what they found. But within 2 weeks, they struck something the Inca themselves had deliberately hidden: a spiral corridor, carved into the rock, winding like a serpent's body. It was almost perfectly symmetrical, 9 full turns before it reached a sudden drop-off. And in the center, laid in a circle like petals of a grotesque flower, were 77 skeletons. Children, aged between 5 and 12, skulls fractured, ribs broken, limbs bound. Carbon dating would later reveal they were over 3,000 years old, a time when no organized state existed in the region. Yet the ritual arrangement was too deliberate, too coordinated to be the work of nomads. And on every single child's chest, the same symbol had been carved into the bone: a spiral intersected by a vertical line, the mark of the coiled kings. But this was just the surface layer. As the crew excavated further, they found something even worse: a long, sloping trough, barely wide enough for a human body, cut into the stone and stained dark red. Testing confirmed it wasn't rust or sediment. It was blood, so much that the stone beneath had absorbed iron traces all the way down, meaning the ritual had been repeated hundreds, possibly thousands, of times. The spiral halls weren't a tomb. They were a processing chamber, a place to feed something. In 2003, leaked photographs from this dig made their way to a retired Peruvian pathologist named Dr. Anselmo Rivas. What he saw disturbed him so deeply that he published a private monograph under a pseudonym. In it, he proposed that the incisions in the ribcages were not post-mortem. The spiral cuts indicated precision removal of internal organs while the victims were still alive. In other words, the sacrifices weren't symbolic. They were functional. Rivas compared the evidence to Mesoamerican rituals in Teotihuacan and Aztec heart extractions, but there was a difference. Those were public, ceremonial acts. This wasn't theater. This was maintenance. Each turn of the spiral corridor seemed designed to focus energy. Blood flowed toward the central basin. The trough was angled for drainage. Runnels in the stone suggested hydraulic pressure, as if the temple wasn't just being fed, but powered. What kind of structure required human pain as fuel? A few months later, a cryptic file appeared on an encrypted forum used by former intelligence operatives and fringe academics. Its title was simple: Project NOx, South Corridor Intercept. It contained excerpts of intercepted radio chatter during a covert military excavation from the mid-90s. One fragment stood out: Central Pit reached. Symbols match Phase 3. Residue active. Corpse wall confirmed. We have lost 2 men to auditory bleed. Eyes bleeding. Pulling back. God forgive us. They were alive when they were sealed into the walls. The final logs mentioned exposure to patterned infrasound, frequencies that triggered extreme aggression, seizures, and what was described as the overwhelming urge to kneel. Those who ventured deeper spoke of chanting, but when asked to repeat the words, they wept or screamed. The spiral wasn't just a shape. It was a command, a circuit, and humans weren't just victims. They were components. The oldest skeletons bore signs of extreme bone stress: limbs broken and reset, spines twisted unnaturally, and skulls partially drilled. The implication? Some sacrifices were kept alive, possibly for days, while the ritual unfolded. But for what purpose? One theory, proposed by a Russian neurologist turned occultist, was as chilling as it was insane: that the spiral structure harvested consciousness, the final moment of agony, pain, death, focused and directed through the temple itself. A psychic engine, he called it. One that could open something. Not metaphorically. Literally. A doorway. The deeper one went, the stronger the phenomena became. Even skeptics admitted that cameras malfunctioned. Radios died. Time seemed to warp. One witness described walking for 10 minutes, only to find they'd been gone for 4 hours. Some came back missing teeth they didn't remember losing. One came back speaking a language no one recognized, and continued speaking it in his sleep, in a voice not his own. And all of it led back to the same source: the coiled corridors. The sacrifices. The blood. It wasn't just a temple. It was a heart. Still beating. Still hungry. And the next time someone fed it, it might just open its eyes. By the late 1990s, whispers of the underground Serpent Empire had spread far beyond the fringe. Intelligence agencies had taken interest, not because they believed in lost civilizations or blood-powered temples, but because someone else did. In 1998, a NATO intelligence intercept picked up strange radio traffic coming from the Peruvian highlands. Encrypted messages referencing deep asset retrieval, unmapped architecture, and chillingly, phase sync via organic medium. The messages weren't in Spanish or Quechua. They were in German. The location matched the area of Dr. Heinrich Ebel's last known coordinates, lost since 1939. That same year, an international expedition was quietly assembled. It was called Team K, a joint task effort between private contractors, rogue scholars, and intelligence-affiliated researchers. On paper, it was a climate geology mission. In reality, they were looking for whatever the Nazis had found and never returned from. Team K consisted of 11 members, all highly trained, all sworn to secrecy, all equipped with cutting-edge tech: ground radar, 3D mapping drones, atmospheric samplers, and a mobile quantum resonance scanner designed to detect anomalies in electromagnetic frequencies. They entered the tunnels in June of 1999. They never came out. For 2 weeks, there was no contact. Then, without warning, a package was delivered to a remote embassy outpost in Lima. No return address. No fingerprints. Just a single label, etched into brass, for those who still listen. Inside the box were 2 reels of Super 8 film, a small audio cassette, a bloodstained journal with pages torn out, a human tooth. Engraved with a spiral, the contents were terrifying. The film showed Team K descending into a chamber unlike anything previously documented. The walls were fluid, appearing to ripple under light. The architecture didn't follow Euclidean geometry. Hallways looped without end. Shadows moved independently of their sources. They discovered what they called the chorus room, a vast, domed space covered floor to ceiling in metallic panels etched with glyphs. When they entered, the panels began to resonate, not randomly, but in harmony. The room began to sing. One by one, team members fell to their knees. Some began to bleed from the ears. One began speaking backward. Another disappeared. Turning a corner the others swore led nowhere. The cassette held 13 minutes of audio, disjointed, filled with static, mechanical clicks, and rhythmic thuds like a heartbeat. But at minute 9, a voice broke through. A woman's. Panicked. Crying. It's inside the walls. It doesn't sleep. It's using us to remember. Get out. Don't let it use your name. Then a sound. Wet. Crunching. Like meat pulled apart. And silence. The journal was the last artifact. It belonged to Dr. Adrian Wolf, a neurocognitive specialist. His notes, scrawled in erratic handwriting, revealed something horrifying. The structure is sentient. Or semi-sentient. It's a mnemonic prison. Something was locked here. Not to protect us from it, but to protect it from forgetting. It needs blood. Sacrifice. Names. Memory. Every step we take feeds its stories. We are writing ourselves into it. And I think, God help me, I think it's starting to remember who it is. The final pages were unreadable, soaked in blood, and beneath the last legible line was a small, childlike drawing, a spiral, and inside it an eye. Team K was officially listed as lost due to seismic activity. The tapes were archived under psychological warfare artifacts. The journal was buried in a black site vault in Switzerland. But not all evidence stayed hidden. Years later, a Peruvian villager, just a boy when Team K disappeared, claimed to have seen men crawling out of the forest near his village. Burned, naked, screaming, speaking in tongues. They didn't bleed. They didn't sleep. One was still muttering the same phrase days later before dying. The coil remembers. The coil is dreaming. It needs a name. Only one body was ever recovered. DNA matched a member of Team K, but the autopsy found no brain tissue. Only coagulated dust inside the skull, as if something had erased the person from within. The implication was chilling. The labyrinth feeds on identity. Names, memories, language, a sacrifice not just of flesh, but of self. And deep below, beneath the chorus room, beneath the spiral halls, beneath even the Black Temple, there is something that is listening, and it is almost awake. It happened on March 14, 2011. In the village of Paucartambo, Peru, on the edge of the cloud forest, far from any known road or research station, a gaunt, barefoot man wandered out of the jungle. Emaciated, mute, covered in soot and dried blood. He collapsed in the street and whispered one phrase before losing consciousness. The throne is singing again. At first, no one knew who he was. But fingerprints taken at a regional hospital later matched those of Dr. Adrian Wolf, the neurocognitive expert from Team K, declared dead over a decade earlier. The impossible had happened. Someone had returned from the labyrinth. And he didn't come back alone. Wolf was flown under high-security conditions to an international medical facility in Geneva. For weeks, he refused to speak. He would sit for hours, unmoving, staring at corners. Then, in short bursts, he would scrawl strange spiral patterns on walls, napkins, even his skin. His MRI showed massive degradation in the hippocampus, the region of the brain associated with memory. But neurologists were stunned to find something even stranger, synaptic reformation. As if the brain was rewiring itself, not randomly, but with a clear mathematical pattern. Then, he started talking. Not in English, not in any known language, but in a tone that mimicked human speech patterns, melodic, rhythm-driven, looped like a chant. Linguists were baffled, until a Persian scholar recognized phonetic fragments nearly identical to Avestan, the ancient liturgical language of Zoroastrianism. How did a modern man speak a 3,000-year-old language he'd never studied? Wolf's ramblings, when translated, carried recurring fragments. We do not worship serpents. We are made of them. Every god was once a prisoner. The stone remembers names. I gave it mine. I cannot take it back. In his more lucid moments, Wolf provided details. Haunting, vivid, impossible to ignore. He claimed the labyrinth was not a place, but a transmission device, that it converted pain and memory into signal. A kind of psychic sonar aimed into the void. He said the sacrifices were not just rituals, but calibrations. And most disturbingly, he insisted Team K had not died. They had been absorbed. They are still there, not alive, not dead. They're part of the echo now. The coil is dreaming through them. It wants a face. When asked why he survived, he broke into tears and screamed, "I spoke its name. I gave it mine. That's the only way out." Within 48 hours, Wolf was dead. Officially, a cerebral aneurysm. Unofficially, his attending physician told a colleague off-record that his brain tissue collapsed into itself, as if consumed from the inside. His final CT scan showed a spiral pattern, burned into the center of the brainstem. After Wolf's death, strange phenomena erupted across the Andean region. GPS malfunctions. High-frequency audio bursts picked up by civilian radio. Sudden disappearances of wildlife. Entire flocks of birds vanishing from skies in seconds. Then came the dreams. Locals in dozens of villages began reporting identical nightmares. A throne of stone. A tunnel that breathes. A voice speaking in spirals. Name me. Name me. Let me rise. And something else. Something no one could explain. Children born without language. In the following 2 years, an abnormally high number of infants in the region were born with complete aphasia, no ability to form or process words. Brain scans showed normal development, except for one feature, an unknown spiral structure forming in the language centers of their brains. One child, when given a crayon, drew only one image, a door, and behind it an eye. Researchers buried the data. Governments classified the region as linguistically anomalous. But those who knew the story of Wolf understood he hadn't returned. Not really. What came back was a carrier. And the labyrinth? It wasn't closed. It had merely found a way to extend itself beyond the tunnels. The question was no longer what lay below. The question now was, what had been let out? In 2017, satellite scans over the Madre de Dios region of Peru revealed something impossible. A hexagonal depression, nearly a kilometer across, had appeared overnight in dense jungle. No sign of impact. No seismic activity. The vegetation was not burned or crushed. It had simply ceased to exist. Worse, ground-penetrating radar picked up something beneath the anomaly. Not a ruin, not a tunnel, but a moving structure. Geometric, rhythmic, pulsing, like a mechanical lung, breathing in cycles of 9.8 seconds. As if something deep underground had begun to stir. Within weeks, animals within a 30-mile radius began fleeing en masse. Jaguars entered villages. Birds stopped singing. The jungle, locals said, had gone silent. And the dreams, the spiral dreams, spread beyond Peru. Reports came in from Bolivia, Chile, even remote towns in New Mexico. Same dream, same voice, same plea. Name me. I hunger for form. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, in a temple carved before memory, the coiled god, a being from the darkest mythologies of proto-human belief, was waking. He had many names. Too many. And that was the problem. Across cultures, his identity had been fractured into Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, Amaru, Gukyamats. But those weren't names. They were deflections. Protective mistranslations. Lies, told to keep the true name buried. Because the truth was too awful to speak. The coiled one was not a god. He was a survivor. A remnant from before time was counted. Before stories were told. A consciousness that had once devoured itself in a failed attempt at transcendence. Only to find rebirth in suffering. A being who had turned the act of memory into nourishment and language into a cage. And now, the cage was cracking. Some believe ancient shamans, centuries ago, made a pact. They split his name into syllables and scattered them across myths. Each ritual, each bloodletting, each offering, was a way of maintaining the dismemberment, a linguistic dissection. But now, thanks to technology, archaeology, and hubris, the syllables were reuniting. The spiral was reforming, and the labyrinth was no longer enough to contain it. Evidence appeared in strange places. Audio engineers analyzing field recordings from the jungle discovered hidden frequencies, inhuman and harmonic, encoded beneath ambient noise. A blind child in Cusco drew an entire topographical map of the Serpent Tunnels, despite never having seen them. A linguist at a university in Berlin suffered a complete psychotic break after deciphering a fragment from the Wolf Journal. Her final act was to carve a spiral into her tongue with a fountain pen. The signs were everywhere, if you knew how to see them. And yet the official world remained silent. Governments denied the reports. Academics mocked the claims. It was easier to say it was a mass delusion. But underground, beneath the coil, things were changing. In 2019, a team of illegal spelunkers, black market artifact hunters, entered the jungle near the anomaly site. Their livestream ended after 6 minutes. But in those 6 minutes, the world saw something unforgettable. They entered a tunnel lined with bone, carved with symbols that flickered in and out of visibility. As they progressed, their instruments failed, batteries drained, compasses spun, even digital watches reversed direction. Then, without warning, the floor fell away. One man screamed, "We're not underground. We're inside it." The feed cut out. The last frame showed a massive chamber of impossible geometry. And at its center, suspended in air, was a black, serpentine shape. Moving, breathing, coiled not in aggression, but in anticipation. Like a fetus waiting to be born. The file was wiped from most platforms within hours. But copies spread in dark corners of the net. They called it the womb of names. And behind that name, the real terror, that the entity beneath the labyrinth, whether God, machine, or echo, was not just waking. It was gestating. And every name spoken, every word recorded, every attempt to understand it, was fuel. A contribution. A sacrifice. This was no longer a matter of ruins or rituals. This was ontological infection, a mimetic pathogen that rewrote those who encountered it. And humanity had already passed the threshold. We had dug too deep, remembered too much, and spoken too many syllables of a name that was never meant to be whole. The coiled god was no longer sleeping. He was learning to speak again. By 2023, the labyrinth was no longer just a hidden ruin deep beneath the Andes. It had become a shadow spreading across the world's collective consciousness, a dark spiral pulling tighter around humanity's mind. Governments launched secret containment programs, but they were too late. The phenomenon was no longer localized. Reports flooded in. Entire villages rendered mute overnight. Scholars disappearing after decoding ancient glyphs. Children born with the spiral tattooed in their retinas, unseen by others, but vivid to themselves. A spike in suicides preceded by trance-like states and spiral visions. Digital platforms struggled to filter out the coil signal, a complex audio pattern that seemed embedded in music, broadcasts, even casual conversation. Anyone exposed found their memories warped, their speech laced with forbidden phonemes. The coil was no longer a place. It was a virus of language, culture, and identity. In this final chapter, a clandestine group of linguists, mathematicians, and mystics, calling themselves the Spiral Keepers, gathered in a hidden monastery near Lake Titicaca. They believed the only way to stop the awakening was to unname the coil, to break the cycle of naming and remembering. Their ritual involved a dangerous experiment, a mass vocal silence, a day where all spoke only in signs, gestures, and silence, rejecting language itself. But the coil fought back. As the ritual began, the earth trembled beneath the monastery. The skies darkened. A low, guttural chant rose from the depths of the Andes, a language older than humanity itself. The spiral appeared in the clouds, a massive, coiling shadow blotting out the sun. The keepers held their silence, their minds reaching outward, trying to sever the coil's grip. But one by one they fell. Not dead, but lost, absorbed into the labyrinth's vast memory, their names erased. Only one remained, a young linguist named Amaru. She had studied the coil her entire life. She knew the final truth. The coil was not just an ancient god or a machine. It was a mirror, a reflection of humanity's deepest fears, its capacity for violence, sacrifice, and forgetting. The labyrinth beneath the Andes was the first spiral, but the spiral had no end. It was in the words we speak, in the stories we tell, in the memories we choose to keep or lose. Amaru's final act was to write, not a name, not a word, but a spiral, etched into the stone floor, glowing softly beneath her fingertips. A circle closed, a breath held, and then silence. Whether the coil slept again or simply paused, no one knows. But the spiral remains, waiting, always waiting, for the next word, the next name, the next sacrifice. Because some labyrinths are not made of stone. They are made of memory. And some gods never truly die. In the shadows beneath the Andes, we uncovered a secret older than civilization itself. A labyrinth woven not just from stone, but from memory, sacrifice, and the very language we use to define ourselves. The Lost Labyrinths of the Serpent Kings reveal a chilling truth, that some ancient forces are not merely relics of the past, but living echoes that shape our present and haunt our future. As the spiral tightens around humanity's collective mind, the question remains, how far will we go to remember, and at what cost? If this story unsettled you, left you questioning the boundaries between myth and reality, subscribe for more deep dives into the world's darkest and most shocking histories. Share your thoughts below. What do you believe lies beneath the labyrinth? And when you're ready for another journey into forbidden truths, check out our playlist of stories that refuse to be forgotten. Remember, some names are never meant to be spoken. Some doors never opened. Until next time, stay curious, but beware the coil.